on the NewsChannel 5 network. This is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Looking forward to a good discussion tonight, talking about Nashville, its future. Are we a progressive city? What do you think? And I'm happy to have with us the opinion editor from the Tennessean, David Plazas. David, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming on once again. Always good to talk to you. And you wrote an opinion piece the day or the Sunday after the election. And it was about the election, obviously, Cooper and Briley. Briley faced a tough task, but citizens still wanted more urgency from him, is the headline. In here, you say, let's be real, Nashville is not a progressive city. It is a highly capitalistic and opportunistic city. And I was very interested by that. So what are you getting at there?
Sure.
Let's talk about that. I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that phrase for quite some time, and as I've been observing the city. So in 2017, I embarked on a year-long series called The Costs of Growth and Change in Nashville, and really got deep on issues of displacement, gentrification, and the opposite side of growth. So growth in Nashville is very good, of course, but it's not inclusive right now. And the policies that essentially our city leaders were putting forth were benefiting mostly people with means and mostly people who could build. And that's not healthy for a community. It's not healthy for the people who have to do the labor, whether it's construction or waitressing or restaurant work or other work that sustains us. Tourism is such an important part of our economy. The sales tax is so important to us, and we need people who are not necessarily making business level, C-level type salaries to be able to thrive and succeed here as well. So it is a provocative phrase for sure, and it's been on my mind for several months, and I found that it was a time to basically say it because we needed to challenge us, especially as we're going into a new administration. The question is, will we move forward in that direction, or will we further allow that chasm between haves and have-nots grow?
Because you're saying this at a time when both mayoral candidates were kind of fighting to be considered progressive. That was a positive label, and I think they're fighting for that label because we are a blue county. We're a Democratic county, and normally you put progressive Democrat in the same sort of category. But I guess how are you defining, when you say we're not a progressive city, how are you defining that?
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes progressive has been synonymous with liberal, and in fact, for many liberals, they preferred progressive because liberal became a dirty word for many, and even now Republicans are equating liberals with socialists, which I think is a little bit of an off argument. But going back to the progressive argument, the question is, progressive is about building solutions for people. It's about helping, understanding, heeding the popular will, and creating policies, creating laws that will help those who may really be marginalized. And so from the standpoint of, in name, if you're talking about Democratic label, yes, both candidates are progressive from that standpoint. And it was really interesting to see both try to take that label, that mantle. And when John Cooper was criticized for not being progressive enough, I got a mailer at my home the next week or so that said the progressive candidate for Nashville. And a lot of it is more of a label, but the question is, what does it really mean? And in my mind, if you're going to be a progressive candidate, you're really going to face the issues that we look at in Nashville. Why hasn't the growth been equitable? Why aren't there equal opportunities for people, be it the long-time African-American population, 30% of the population, that is in many cases still in historically segregated areas. And in other areas that were historically segregated, they're being pushed out. Because you've got new development in the urban core that's been happening for the last 20 or so years, and we have seen that growth has been good. And I mentioned in the column as well that Mayor Briley's grandfather, who was the first Metro Nashville Mayor, Beverly Briley, was in front of a sign that said, "Let's go and grow." So progressiveness in their mind was about business growth, and again, that's good as long as you think about it in an inclusive way, and we really haven't done so.
And we are a nonpartisan in the mayoral race. But it would be fair to say that our last few mayors have been Democrats.
That's correct.
And so what you're saying is that a portion of people have been left behind, and people with means have been able to benefit from our growth. That doesn't sound like something that Democrats would be proud of or would do. Is that right, or what do you say?
That's right. To be fair, it's a problem that cities across America are facing. And in many cases, they're cities led by Democrats, be it New York, San Jose, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, where you're seeing this growth in inequality. And mainly it's affecting negatively the marginalized, mainly communities of color. who are demanding a seat at the table. There are certain examples. We'll see how the Chicago example goes with new Mayor Lightfoot. She was elected not too long ago. She is a person of color and also a member of the LGBTQ community that was initially told that she wasn't going to win, and she did. She beat a large pool of candidates. The question is, will that model work? Because there are a lot of issues in Chicago there. Can we learn something there? I've traveled several cities across the country over the last couple of years to try to understand what's working and what's not. And many of the issues that's affecting them are affecting us, like transit, growing traffic congestion. The growth that secret sauce of Nashville is drawing so many people here. And we're growing at a rate that includes net growth that's generally between 93 and 106 people a day. And that's also causing a strain on our infrastructure. And the question is, what are we doing really to service those neighborhoods? Now, John Cooper, I believe, won because he was able to tell that story, speak to people's concern and angst about, where's my chance at getting this prosperity? And not in the sense of people want to be a wealthy developer, but in the sense of, where's my crosswalk in Madison? Where is my better traffic on Bell Road in Antioch? Why can't I get that seawall in Bellevue? What about rural communities, whether it's in Whites Creek or Jolton? Thinking about that holistically.
And in the column that was right beside yours, it said what this election was about was discussed, and it's some of those things. People most likely to vote, longtime residents, the elderly, native Nashvillians have seen enough. The influx of new residents, the traffic, the tourism dollars spent downtown, none of it has anything to do with them, is what was written in the column right beside yours. Do you feel like, you look back on this election, is that what you feel like was happening here?
I do, and I saw the signs of that back when I did the project in 2017, and it was exacerbated essentially by the mayoral scandal of Mayor Barry, and that led to this uncertainty for months. And even though Mayor Briley took over, there was still a special election. There were several elections down the road, and so there was this sense of where are we headed? And we were told essentially to move forward, but for whom? Who was moving forward? And what people saw was, well, the soccer stadium is moving forward, Amazon incentives are moving forward, and many of them have positive effects on employment and opportunity for people in Nashville. Don't get me wrong, I'm very much for positive economic development and have written supportively of many of the things like the soccer stadium. But the question is, have we kept in mind people? Now, in the soccer stadium's case, it was very interesting. That's one that there's somewhat of a success story there, a community benefits agreement, the first in Nashville, where you basically promise workers that they're going to have a shot at making a fair wage, and you keep those promises. There's been a lot of issues related to wage theft and a lot of issues related to construction deaths that haven't been addressed because of the lack of fairness of wages or the competition as well. We do have a tremendous workforce shortage because of the great building boom, and addressing those issues, while trying to balance growth and prosperity is very difficult in a state where you have generally regressive tax regimens, like the sales tax, for example. We have no income tax. The Constitution forbids it. The people decided to vote against, vote for an amendment that would forbid it forever in the state constitution. And so our resources are limited. So back in 2018, when Mayor Briley took over, there were several promises that were made to public employees, for example, raises. And you already have people who are not being paid enough to do what they're doing, and in many cases they're being paid less than the median household income of $52,000 a year, and they're told, well, your health care costs might go up, and they did go up for many, but your salaries are not going up. So you're essentially losing money to live in its city. Now that term, I think, going to those issues, two terms that I think have fallen out of favor with many voters are its city and New Nashville, because the question is,
right,
whose Nashville is that? And I am not from here. I've been here for 5 years, so I speak to it very honestly from the standpoint of a relative newcomer, but one who has observed very carefully what's been going on.
This anger that people seem to have, this disgust, is it, in your opinion, was it realistic? I mean, was that an appropriate feeling to have, or was it unrealistic?
So I should say that the disgust comment came from my
your colleague,
yes. Alex Hubbard, and
right.
I think, but he lives in Goodlettsville, where they weren't feeling that sense of prosperity. And I live in Salemtown, just to be honest with your viewers, and so I'm closer to the downtown area, where there's a little different reality. But we play off each other quite a bit in terms of that, and I think it was real. Perception is reality. I think that the Briley administration had really sown some important seeds for equity, He had laid out a vision at his last State of Metro speech back in May talking about equity, but it just wasn't fast enough. And that's one thing that I documented in the column as well. It's like people were looking for something, and it seemed like, wait.
And Briley, in his in one of the debates at least, and in his concession speech, mentioned the schools and how they're becoming more segregated. And so he's diving right into race there. Do you think, what do you think of that? You think that's warranted, and kind of what do you think of what he's saying there?
No, it's a national trend. The Washington Post just documented this, that showing the difference between school populations in 1995 to 2017. You saw a significant difference in terms of populations of white kids who typically made up the majority, for example, in Nashville schools back then. And the reason was that for many years, Nashville and other cities were under court orders to be integrated or to do busing. And after that court order was lifted, because it was declared that we had received this unitary status, that we were desegregated, suddenly we come back to the situation where we're seeing the further concentration of poverty and of certain races in different schools because of people's decision to move somewhere or the other, or people's inability to stay in one particular neighborhood because they're priced out of the market. And just to give some trend information, back in 2010, a two-bedroom apartment might have been about $700 or $800. Today it's about $1,600. And wages haven't increased at that same rate. And so you've seen a lot of people who are distressed, and people are making decisions for their own kids. They're like, do I stay in Metro Nashville, Davidson County, or do I go to Williamson County or Rutherford County or Wilson County, where the test scores are better, there's less poverty, and this is an issue that we're really confronting. The majority of the kids in the public schools live in low-income situations. It's not their fault. And the question is, how can we create better outcomes for these kids where only a third of kids are reading at grade level? And it's getting exacerbated because you have these issues of systemic poverty and generational poverty that have become a barrier, what we call adverse childhood experiences.
Were you surprised by the final result here? It was pretty significant, 69%. The Tennessean endorsed Briley.
Yes.
You wrote the article, right, about the endorsement.
I did.
So were you surprised? Kind of walk us through that. I guess why the endorsement, and were you surprised as the campaign progressed?
Sure. We went through a process where we interviewed all the major mayoral candidates, the four mayoral candidates: Mayor Briley, Mayor-elect Cooper, John Ray Clemens, the state representative, and Carol Swain. I think you've all had him here on the show at some point. And we went through a process where we asked them to fill out a questionnaire, and then we asked them some probing questions about finances. We felt that Mayor Briley was best positioned to handle some of the situations that we had. The financial situations related to how do you balance a budget on one-time sales of property or a parking privatization, and there were some things that we had questions about, but we felt he adequately answered those. We also felt that he had planted those important seeds related to Nashville Grad, which basically is a program that helps kids who are going through the Tennessee Promise to get their community college degree or technical college degree. And I think also the other thing that we looked at was the issue of equity and trying to really get his hands around the issue of schooling and education, because we had gone through a transition where the school board had bought out the contract of the former superintendent, Sean Joseph. So we felt that he had the experience, he had the scars, and that he had set the stage for the next level. But it was going to be hard and painful, especially without a property tax increase. Now, personally, as a columnist, this is not the editorial board's standpoint. My personal opinion, which I wrote last year, was that we should have raised the property tax rate. I don't think we would have been in the situation that we are today. There would have been more consistency, perhaps more perceived transparency, and people can check out the budget on Metro's website. There's a lot of information out there, but the argument that then Councilman Cooper made, now Mayor-elect Cooper made, was very true. It's like, what's going on with Metro? Why is the state comptroller telling you that he's concerned about your finances? He demands to know what the answer is to that, and those were real concerns that John Cooper exploited successfully.
Do you think that was a politically fatal decision, which I think you may have written, that Mayor Briley opposed raising property taxes, which is almost counterintuitive, that if he had raised property taxes, it might have, usually that's the thing that hurts politicians. But do you think it would have been beneficial to him if he had come in and said, I'm going to raise property taxes?
Hindsight is 20/20, as they say, but to give you an example, Bob Mendez, the at-large councilman who spearheaded these moves to raise the property tax, was the only person who was elected outright without a runoff for re-election to his seat as an at-large councilman. And he had put his political career in peril, and yet people rewarded him because he was bold to say, hey, if we don't raise this certain amount, we're not going to be able to balance our budget. We shouldn't be living off our savings. I understand the argument about not raising the property tax, because I considered those as I was weighing my own opinion, which was, do you really want to burden people who've already seen a property tax increase, especially if you're in an area that has had tremendous growth, whether Germantown, Salemtown, or Wedgwood, Houston, Woodbine, wherever you've seen tremendous amounts of growth, they saw some degree of tax increase. The other thing too is when it comes to taxing commercial property owners, this is where a lot of the trouble came, is that 80% of the appeals came from commercial property owners, so that created this, that in part created that shortfall. And the question is, when you tax further a business, how will they pass it down? Will they eat that cost, or will they pass it down to a consumer, or to a who might buy less, or to the workforce where they may not be able to hire as many? And so there are a lot of things that we don't know the answer to, but in hindsight it looks like the mayor probably should have raised taxes, or at least said this year, okay, we tried it without a tax increase in 2018, 2019, let's go for a modest one. Even Steve Glover, who won his seat initially, he wasn't expected to win. He came in 8th place to come to the runoff, but he won one of the at-large seats, and he had proposed a very modest tax increase.
Because it seemed like there was such anger on the part of Metro employees and others that didn't get a raise, that were asked to wait.
Yes.
And maybe that was a decision that was harmful and all that.
Yeah, and the way that was shown, when people say that you vote with your feet, the Fraternal Order of Police and the Metro Nashville Employees Association, the teachers union, both endorsed Cooper for the runoff. And there are groups that usually would not necessarily be aligned politically.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. All right, so that kind of sets the table. And now I'll ask you, what do you think? And so there's the question on the bottom. That's part of it. Is Nashville a progressive city? Where do we go from here? Love to hear your thoughts on that. But really, call about anything related to the city. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.